Welcome to the channel, where every day we uncover stories that remind us of honor, legacy, and the unseen courage in everyday lives. Today's tale is one of quiet tests and unexpected heroes. And trust me, you won't want to miss it. Before we dive in, drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. We love hearing from people all over the world. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss tomorrow's powerful new story. Now, get comfortable, because this one just might change how you see tradition. A retired soldier secretly tested his replacement. What he found shocked him. Captain Mark Davis adjusted the collar of his civilian coat as he stepped onto the familiar grounds of Arlington Historic Base. The chill in the Virginia air carried a mix of damp leaves and old stone, scents that once felt as familiar as the weight of his own rifle. It had been 3 months since he hung up his uniform. 3 months since a piece of shrapnel tore through his leg on deployment, ending a 30-year career in the Honor Guard with a single, sharp twist of fate. As he walked among the crowd of tourists, Mark couldn't help but feel like an outsider. Without the uniform, without the rigid structure of his old life, he felt untethered. He tugged his cap lower over his brow and reminded himself, "You're just another visitor now." But deep down, he didn't believe it. That morning, Mark wasn't there to relive memories. He had a mission. Through a few quiet calls and favors from old military contacts, he had learned the name of the man who had taken his place. Private Ryan Mitchell, 24 years old, perfect record, highly recommended. On paper, Ryan was everything the Guard could hope for. But paper didn't stand still for hours in blistering heat or freezing wind. Paper didn't ignore the stares, the insults, or the pressure. Mark had lived that life, day after day, year after year. And he knew one thing with certainty: only those who understood the weight of the uniform deserved to wear it. His plan was simple: 3 days of silent observation, 3 days to watch, to test, and to decide. Would Ryan Mitchell simply perform the role or truly uphold the tradition? Mark checked his watch. 10 minutes until the changing of the guard. Right on schedule. He found a place near the front, his stance naturally straight, like the habit had never left him. Around him, tourists murmured and laughed, unaware of the quiet evaluation unfolding among them. "Let's see what you're made of, Private," Mark thought, narrowing his eyes on the young man in uniform as he stepped into position. This wasn't just about discipline. It was about legacy. And Mark Davis wasn't ready to let go of it just yet. Mark didn't come all this way just to watch. He came to test. The changing of the guard began with its usual precision. Every movement choreographed to perfection, every step echoing across the courtyard like a heartbeat. Tourists snapped photos, whispered in awe, and pointed at the scarlet uniforms as if watching a performance. But Mark Davis wasn't looking for pageantry. He was watching Ryan Mitchell, the young private now holding the position he once stood in for 3 decades. From behind the lens of a borrowed camera, Mark observed like a hawk. Ryan's posture was solid. His rifle placement? Spot on. The angle of his cap? Impeccable. But Mark wasn't interested in surface-level perfection. He was hunting for the cracks beneath the surface, those moments where discomfort, distraction, or ego could sneak in. The first day, Ryan passed every visual check, but Mark wasn't convinced. Perfection could be rehearsed. Pressure, however, revealed truth. Day 2 brought rain. Cold, relentless, bone-soaking rain. The kind that soldiers learn to hate. Mark saw it as the perfect storm. He gave a nod across the crowd to Colonel George Whitman, his old friend, now dressed in plain clothes but carrying himself like the officer he'd always been. It was time to see if Ryan could hold the line when things got messy. "Nice rifle," George called out casually, stepping closer to the rope line, his voice rising over the drizzle. "Is it real or just for show?" Ryan didn't move, not even a blink. George pushed further. "Do they let you guys take bathroom breaks, or are you stuck playing statue all day?" Laughter bubbled from nearby tourists. Mark could feel their discomfort. They didn't realize this was part of a silent test. Ryan remained still, calm, unshaken. Only when George crossed the line, reaching toward the tassels on his uniform, did Ryan shift. Not aggressively, not emotionally. Just enough to reposition his rifle into a formal warning stance. "Step back, sir," he said. 3 words: calm, commanding, controlled. Mark felt something shift inside him. The kid hadn't flinched, hadn't cracked. He held the line with just the right balance of restraint and authority. For the first time in 2 days, Mark Davis wasn't looking for weakness. He was starting to see something else. Mark couldn't shake what he saw the day before. Ryan Mitchell had passed the pressure test with flying colors: calm, professional, unshakable. But standing still in a storm and diffusing a heckler was just one side of the uniform. Mark needed to know what the kid stood for when no one was watching. So on day 3, he followed him. Not close enough to draw suspicion, but close enough to see where he went after the ceremony ended. Mark expected him to head for the barracks. Or maybe the local bar. Most young soldiers needed to blow off steam after standing still for hours. Instead, Ryan boarded a public bus heading toward the edge of town. Curious, Mark climbed into his own car and followed from a distance. 20 minutes later, Ryan walked through the gates of the Oak Ridge Veterans Rehabilitation Center, a place Mark knew all too well. He had spent 6 months rehabbing there after the injury that ended his career. Mark parked, flashed his old credentials at the front desk, and made his way down a familiar hallway. Laughter echoed from a side room, genuine, unforced. Mark paused in the doorway, staying out of sight. There he was, Ryan Mitchell. No uniform, but still upright, alert, and every bit the soldier. He was seated in a circle with wounded veterans, some missing limbs, others haunted by invisible scars. Ryan wasn't just visiting, he was teaching. Start small. Ryan said to a young vet struggling with a prosthetic arm, "Little cuts, steady movements. Just like drills, master the basics before you go fancy." Wood shavings scattered across the table. Carving tools passed from hand to hand. Ryan's tone was steady, encouraging, humble. He wasn't there for credit. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. A nurse approached Mark, speaking softly. "He comes every Wednesday. No one assigned him. He requested it. Says his younger brother lost his leg overseas, and this place helped him heal. Now he gives back." Mark didn't say a word. He couldn't. Something about that room, the quiet focus, the shared strength, the way Ryan connected with those men, it struck deeper than any perfect salute or polished boot ever could. This wasn't about discipline anymore. This was about devotion. Mark left the rehab center that afternoon with a lot on his mind. Ryan Mitchell wasn't just a soldier who could follow orders. He was someone who gave his time, his energy, even his heart when nobody was watching. Still, Mark wasn't ready to hand over his legacy just yet. There was one final question to answer. Could Ryan lead when it truly mattered? The next morning brought clear skies and larger crowds. Families packed the walkways, kids leaned over the rope barriers, and the usual wave of cameras clicked in rhythm. Everything looked normal, until the shouting started. Near the northeast corner, just behind the main rope line, an elderly man collapsed. His wife screamed his name. Panic rippled through the crowd like a sudden gust of wind. Mark's instincts kicked in. He took one step forward, then stopped. This wasn't his post anymore. It was Ryan's. The young guard stood at attention, still as stone, eyes locked forward. Protocol demanded stillness unless explicitly relieved. But Mark watched the tension build. Ryan had seconds to decide whether to hold the line or break it. Then, with precise, measured movements, Ryan stepped forward. "Stand aside, please," he said, his voice calm but firm. The crowd instinctively moved. He knelt beside the man, checked his pulse, loosened his collar, and tilted his head back, all while staying composed. "Sir, can you hear me?" Ryan asked. "He has a heart condition," the wife cried. "I can't find his meds." "Has someone called 911?" Ryan asked without looking up. "On the way," someone answered. A palace officer arrived with a defibrillator, and Ryan worked beside him like they'd trained together. Quick, focused, professional. When paramedics finally arrived, Ryan handed off smoothly, stood up, brushed down his uniform, and calmly returned to his post. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Cameras lowered. Whispers replaced chatter. Mark watched it all unfold with a knot in his chest. Ryan hadn't just stepped out of formation. He had stepped into command. He had known exactly when duty meant standing still, and when it meant taking action. Not for attention, not for applause, because it was the right thing to do. Mark exhaled slowly. The final test was over, and Ryan Mitchell hadn't just passed. He had earned every inch of that ground beneath his boots. That evening, Mark Davis sat alone at a corner table in a quiet diner just off the main strip. The hum of conversation filled the room, but his thoughts were elsewhere. still replaying the moment Ryan Mitchell stepped out of formation to save a stranger's life. That wasn't protocol. That was leadership. At exactly 7 p.m., the door swung open. Ryan walked in wearing civilian clothes, but his posture gave him away. Straight-backed, eyes alert. Still a soldier, even without the uniform. "Captain Davis," he said, extending a hand. "I figured you'd show up eventually." Mark raised an eyebrow as they shook hands. "You knew?" Ryan gave a small nod. "Since day one. Your angles, the way you watched the ceremony, the test with Colonel Whitman. I recognized the setup." "And you never said anything?" "There was no need," Ryan replied. "You weren't trying to embarrass me. You were trying to protect the position." Mark studied him for a moment. No ego. No arrogance. Just quiet confidence. "You handled that medical emergency yesterday like someone with experience," Mark said. "2 tours in Afghanistan," Ryan replied. "Combat medic. Lost 3 good men I couldn't save. Promised myself I'd never stand by if I could help." Mark leaned back, letting that sink in. He thought he'd come to test a kid, but everything he'd seen, every action, every decision, told him Ryan Mitchell wasn't just worthy of the uniform. He was meant for it. "What made you choose the honor guard?" Mark asked. "With your background, you could have gone anywhere." Ryan's voice softened. "Family. My grandfather stood guard during the Gulf War. My dad did 15 years. It's not just tradition, it's personal. When I wear that uniform, I'm standing for something bigger than myself." Mark felt something shift inside him. For weeks, he'd been clinging to the past, afraid that when he left the post, the values he stood for would disappear. But sitting across from Ryan, he saw it clearly. Tradition didn't die. It evolved. "You're not my replacement," Mark said quietly. "You're my successor." "There's a difference." Ryan nodded. "Exactly. We don't own the uniform. We just carry it for a while, then pass it on." For the first time since retirement, Mark Davis felt at peace. He hadn't lost his legacy. He had passed it on to someone who would protect it well. If this story moved you even half as much as it did us, we'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think of Captain Davis's journey? From doubt and fear to acceptance and pride. Have you ever misjudged someone from a younger generation, only to be surprised by their strength and integrity? Leave us a comment below and share your perspective. Maybe you've served or know someone who has. Maybe there's a tradition in your family that you're proud to carry forward. Whatever your story is, this is a space where respect, legacy, and real human values matter. Let us know where you're watching from too. We love seeing how far these stories travel. And if there's someone in your life who still believes tradition is just about ceremony, send this video their way. Sometimes the most powerful lessons come wrapped in silence, stillness, and sacrifice. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell. Tomorrow, we've got another incredible story that dives even deeper into what it means to serve, to sacrifice, and to pass something on that's bigger than yourself. Now, it's your turn. Scroll down, speak up, we're listening.